On April 7th, 2026, inside the United Nations Security Council, something happened that almost nobody understood. And I mean nobody, not the journalists, not the ambassadors, not even most of the analysts who spent hours talking about it on television. China made one single move, and with that move, it may have just changed the entire outcome of this war, without firing a single bullet, without losing a single soldier, and without spending a single dollar on weapons. By the end of this video, I am going to show you exactly what that move was, why the Western media got it completely backwards, and why April 7th may go down in history as the day America's era of dominance quietly, irreversibly began to end. But before we get there, quick question. Where in the world are you watching this right now? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this conversation is actually reaching. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. To understand what happened on April 7th, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is, because most people hear the name and think geography, a narrow waterway, something on a map. But the Strait of Hormuz is not just geography. It is the jugular vein of the entire global economy. 20% of the world's oil passes through that waterway every single day. 20%. If it closes, oil prices explode, economies buckle, supply chains collapse, and the countries that depend most on Gulf oil, China, Japan, South Korea, India, they feel it first and they feel it hardest. So, when the strait started closing down, when Iranian forces began restricting transit as retaliation for American and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, the world panicked. And the United States went to the United Nations and said, we need a resolution, we need international authorization to use, and I am quoting directly here, all necessary means to ensure freedom of transit through the Strait of Hormuz. 11 countries voted yes. It seemed obvious. Of course you reopen the strait. Of course you restore the flow of global energy. Who could possibly say no to that? China said no. Russia said no. And the Western media immediately had its headline. China and Russia shield Iran. China and Russia side with a regime threatening the global economy. China and Russia are the bad guys. But here is the question I want you to hold in your mind, and I want you to really sit with this before I answer it. China is the world's single largest buyer of Iranian oil. China gets a massive portion of its total energy supply through the Strait of Hormuz. China is arguably the biggest economic victim of this blockade. So why? Why would China veto the resolution to reopen it? Why would the country being hurt most by the closure be the one blocking the solution? Think about that, because the answer to that question is the answer to everything.
Let me walk you through this carefully, because the logic builds layer by layer, and each layer is more important than the last. Layer 1. What the resolution would actually have done. Even in its final, watered-down form, and they revised it multiple times, stripping out aggressive language, removing references to military authorization, softening it again and again. Even then, the resolution would have given the United States and its allies something extremely valuable: legal legitimacy, international cover, the United Nations saying, yes, America, you have the right to be here. You have the right to control this waterway. And if America successfully uses that cover to reopen the strait by force, if Iran is pushed back, if the blockade ends on American terms, then America has just demonstrated something the entire world is watching for: that even in 2026, America can still control the world's most critical energy choke point. That American power, even after years of supposed decline, still decides who gets energy and who does not. For China, that is not a neutral outcome. That is a nightmare, because it means China goes back to being dependent on American goodwill for its own energy supply. It means the thing Chinese strategists call the Malacca dilemma, America's ability to strangle China's economy by controlling sea lanes. It means that dilemma gets worse, not better. So blocking the resolution was not about protecting Iran. It was about preventing America from reasserting control over the arteries of global trade. Layer 2. What happens when the strait stays closed? Now here is where it gets genuinely sophisticated. Yes, the closure is hurting China in the short term, but in the medium term, it is accelerating something China has been quietly working toward for decades: the petrodollar system. Since 1973, all oil in the world has been traded in US dollars. That single arrangement is the financial foundation of American power. It is why the world needs dollars. It is why America can run enormous deficits and still dominate global finance. Destroy the petrodollar, and you pull the foundation out from under the entire American empire. Every week the strait stays closed, Gulf oil stops flowing. Petrodollars stop recycling into American markets. The financial architecture of American dominance cracks just a little more. And the alternatives, yuan-based oil trade, Belt and Road payment systems, Russian, Iranian, Chinese energy corridors, those alternatives become just a little more attractive, just a little more necessary. China is not watching this crisis. China is reading this crisis, and what it sees is an accelerant. Layer 3. China was prepared for exactly this. You might be asking, but if China is running short on oil, how is any of this sustainable? And this is where you have to understand something about how China thinks about supply chains, not in quarters, but in decades. China has been building strategic petroleum reserves for years. It has been constructing the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, giving it Arabian Sea access that completely bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. It has been developing overland energy routes through Russia and Iran. And it has been building domestic renewable energy capacity, solar, wind, nuclear, at a pace that no other country on Earth has matched, specifically to reduce dependence on Gulf oil. China took the short-term pain, but China was the only major power that was actually ready for it. America was not. Europe was not. Japan and South Korea were not. And every week this crisis continues, China's alternatives become more valuable, and the American-controlled maritime system becomes more obsolete.
Now I want to give you the complete picture, because this is the part most analysts missed entirely. When China's ambassador stood up in that chamber and said, "The resolution fails to address the root causes of this conflict," he was not making a procedural objection. He was making a statement to every country in the world that has ever been on the receiving end of American military power. Think about the logic of what America actually did. America and Israel launched strikes on Iran, a sovereign nation. They bombed nuclear facilities. They killed Iranian leaders. And then, after starting this war, America walked into the United Nations and said, "Please authorize us to use force against Iran because Iran is fighting back." You started the fire. Then you asked for permission to punish the building for burning. And most of the world, the global South, Asia, Africa, Latin America, most of the world looked at that and thought, "We have seen this before. We have been on the receiving end of this before." And China just said what we have been thinking. That is a narrative victory of enormous proportions, because it repositions China not as Iran's protector, but as the defender of the principle that you do not get to bomb a sovereign country and then receive international authorization to punish that country for defending itself. China claimed the moral high ground, without firing a single shot. Now, let me tie all of this together, because I want you to see the full strategic picture in one frame. War is not just fought with weapons. War is fought across 4 dimensions simultaneously: military, economic, political, and narrative. And China's veto advanced its position in all 4 dimensions at once. Militarily, China blocked America from gaining legal cover for its operations without spending a dollar or risking a single life. Economically, China kept the pressure on the petrodollar system while its own reserves, overland routes, and renewable capacity absorbed the shock better than any rival. Politically, China positioned itself as the enforcer of international law in a world where most countries are not part of the Western alliance and are increasingly frustrated with American unilateralism. And in the narrative, China is now telling a story about itself that resonates with the majority of the world's population. We are not the aggressors, we are the ones holding the line. 1 move, 4 wins, 0 casualties. Now, I hear the counterargument already. China cannot sustain an indefinite oil shortage. Eventually, someone has to blink. And yes, that is true. Nobody can run on empty forever. But the real question is, who runs out of time first? America is running low on interceptor missiles. American public support for this war sits below 40%. High oil prices are squeezing American markets, American consumers, American political patience. And America's allies are quietly calculating how much longer they can absorb the economic cost. Iran is not running out of anything. Its oil revenues are actually up because the geopolitical crisis has lifted sanctions pressure through sheer international fatigue. It has been preparing for this war for 25 years. And China has its reserves, its alternative routes, its domestic energy production, its long game. Time is not on America's side in this war, and China's veto was designed precisely to make sure of that, to extend the clock, to let the costs accumulate, to let the world slowly reorganize itself around different systems, different payment networks, different alliances. This is not a war China is fighting with armies. It is a war China is fighting with patience, with positioning, and with 2 letters at the United Nations. No. That is the power of a veto. That is the power of a country that understands that the most important battles are not always fought with weapons. Sometimes they are fought in chambers, with procedural moves, with legal language, with the quiet, disciplined application of strategic logic. And that is why April 7, 2026 may be the most important day most people never actually understood. I want to know what you think. Do you agree that China made the right call here? Or do you think the costs are too high and China blinked at the wrong moment? Tell me in the comments. And if this analysis made you see something differently, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I will see you in the next one.